Okay, we want to turn overseas now and head to Taiwan. We have a special look inside one of the factories that powers so much technology around us, from our iPhones to medical implants to AI. Companies in Taiwan are producing most of the advanced semiconductors in the world, but industry leaders are warning of a global economic impact unless tensions with China are reined in. NBC's Richard Engel reports.
Vibrant, democratic, rich, and pro-American, Taiwan is the Silicon Valley of Asia. The island has a near monopoly on semiconductors, the chips that drive our digital lives. Taiwan produces over 60% of all semiconductors and a shocking 93% of the most advanced chips needed for AI. NBC News was given rare access to a Taiwanese semiconductor factory. Min Woo is the founder and CEO of Micronics.
How many of these tiny little chips do we depend on to get
look
through
at
the
your
day?
cell phone. If you open it up, it's so many.
The United States is racing to build semiconductor factories, but these tiny digital brains are incredibly difficult to produce. Each one is made of ultra-thin layers of silicon and contain up to 1 billion transistors.
The U.S. is on this initiative to diversify, produce more chips like this in the United States. How long do you think it would take them to catch up?
I would say 10 years.
But will political tensions here boil over before then? China insists Taiwan belongs to Beijing. In early June, a Chinese warship cut off a U.S. Navy destroyer, and Chinese fighters have repeatedly flown over the island.
What would be the economic impact for the world if the semiconductor industry goes offline because of military tensions or a conflict?
My opinion is you'll be set back at least 20 years.
Although Washington has no formal obligation to defend Taiwan, President Biden said he would.
Would U.S. forces defend the island?
Yes, if in fact there was an unprecedented attack.
Robert Tsao, a semiconductor billionaire, has spent $100 million to train the Taiwanese people in civil defense.
Protecting Taiwan is protecting the U.S. interest.
What about all the semiconductor factories here? If the Chinese start to invade, and you don't want the Chinese to take them over, what are you going to do? You're going to blow them up?
Sadly, it may be one option.
A potential digital meltdown that no one wants. Richard Engel, NBC News.
We thank Richard for that report. A stark warning from industry insiders with a looming conflict between China and Taiwan threatening to disrupt the global economy. So how can a crisis be avoided? I want to bring in CNBC anchor and a friend of Top Story, and my good friend, Andrew Ross Sorkin, who's here with me at the Aspen Ideas Festival. Andrew, thanks so much for being here.
Great to be here.
It's sort of a dark topic, right? And you heard Richard there and that report, the idea of blowing up these semiconductor factories. I mean, is that a reality?
I mean, that would be catastrophic. You can think about the pandemic as almost a mini dress rehearsal of what would happen. If you remember, you couldn't buy an automobile.
The supply chain.
The supply chain. Yeah. You couldn't buy an automobile. You couldn't buy a refrigerator. I mean, all of these things have chips in them. And then if you were to think about the even bigger ramifications, every U.S. company would have to get out of China. So then think about what happened with Russia and Ukraine, for example. Think about Nike and Starbucks and Disney and Apple and all of these big companies who would, by default, have to leave. Yeah. It would be cataclysmic for the global economy.
Because everything is tied to Taiwan right now.
Completely.
So I guess the next question is, I know they're making inroads in Japan, but why in the United States, where we build everything, right? Where we think we're the capital economy of the world, if you will, and we are. Why are we so behind when it comes to these chips?
Well, this goes to the issue of the CHIPS Act and trying to incentivize folks to actually build chips here. The United States effectively stopped being in the chip-making business more than 2 decades ago because it was so much cheaper, frankly, to do it in places like Taiwan.
Okay.
And so the real reason is you need to actually incentivize them to do it. The problem is you can't just spin up a chip factory, you know, in a couple of months or even a couple of years.
Yeah, so there was a big moment that I know you guys covered a lot at CNBC. Maybe people in the mainstream press didn't pick up on it as much. It was Warren Buffett, of course, and it was a moment on your network, your colleague Becky Quick interviewing him, and it made headlines a few months ago. I want to play that now for our viewers to take a listen to this.
I do think that
there is a danger there to some. I don't have any idea. There's actually a danger of seismic action. I mean, and where they're located, but that's a low probability, and they're smart people. But would I rather have it that was a U.S. domiciled company than be a subject of who knows what, depending on conditions outside their control? I'd rather, I reevaluated that part of it.
So that's Warren Buffett, right? And he's usually very plain spoken, right? That's why people love listening to him. He pulled out nearly, I think it's more than $4 billion, an investment in Taiwan in a chip factory. And so Warren Buffett, CNBC, Wall Street, all you guys like to sort of predict the future, at least try to.
Right, yes.
How do we read this?
I wouldn't read it as real risk mitigation. I think it's very hard to invest.
But even Warren Buffett, who's cautious, says there's a danger.
Oh, I think everybody thinks there's a danger, but he owns 1 million stocks in the United States. He owns a lot. All of those companies would be impacted just the same way. I think what he was doing has very much to do specifically with the semiconductor industry. But having said that, it's something that is not really, unfortunately, talked about or really in the market, if you will.
And I guess my bigger question was, are these the tea leaves? Are these the tea leaves America needs to be reading, that the situation between China and Taiwan is much more serious than maybe people believe right now?
100%. And if you look at a company like Apple, which has a lot of business
which
China,
relies all in Taiwan too.
But they are also now trying to put more and more of their supply chain in places like India and other countries. Everybody's trying in their own way to try to find new channels, new ways to have a new supply chain, so there's some resilience. And that's in large part a function of this. The supply chain piece, though, around semiconductors is the most complicated.
Yeah, and it could take 10 years, as we heard there. Andrew Ross Sorkin, thanks so much for joining us. Great talking here. Great conversation. Coming up, the high-rise inferno.